Then to double click in any icon or other Windows item inside the Windows user interface in order to start a program or open a file. The first argument is the file or program to be double clicked. In this case we want to call the Explorer, the Windows Explorer. And the second argument could be an empty string if there are no parameters to be passed, or any parameters that that file or program might expect. In this case we're going to call the Windows Explorer with the current path that we just created. Calling this function opens a new Windows Explorer showing all the max files that were created for all the scene objects. Now let's do the same, but instead of saving to max files, let's write to a supported export format like 3ds, obj or dxf. Other than the save nodes function, which accepts one or more scene nodes as first argument, the function export file operates either on the whole scene or on the current selection. Obviously, in order to save every single object to a separate export file, we would have to use the for loop to first select a single object and then call the export file function in selected only mode. Let's first create the output path using the max file path and a custom string single objects export. Since MaxScript is an expression-based language, we can pass the result of this assignment as the argument of the makeDir function. In this case, we are assigning the new path to the variable the path and creating the new subfolder single object export in a single line instead of two. The result is true, which means that the directory was created. Now we can use a for loop for all in geometry. The reason we are using geometry and not objects in order to access all the scene objects is that most of the supported export formats cannot deal well with some specific 3ds Max objects like helpers, splines and so on. So it's a good idea in this case to only export the geometry objects, the boxes and the sphere. So first we're going to select the single object and then call the export file with the path that we just created slash the name of the object and the 3ds extension. In this case we're going to use the 3ds export, but we could replace the extension with any supported extension like obj, dxf and so on, and the corresponding export plugin would be used. The export file accepts a special keyword, no prompt, which means that no setup dialog is going to be displayed when exporting. All the current defaults are going to be used. And last but not least, selected only, set to true, which means that the selected object is the only one which is going to be exported by the export file function. We enclosed both expressions, deselect all, then semicolon, and the second expression export in brackets. So both are going to be executed for each iteration of the loop. We can now execute this line and, as always, take a look at the result. Shall launch the Windows Explorer with the current path. As you can see, all the boxes and the sphere were exported to the 3ds format and saved in the subfolder we created. Now let's see how we could import all the single 3ds files we just exported into a single max scene. The corresponding function to export file is, as you would expect, import file. Let's first clean the current scene and use the path variable, which still contains the export path, in order to get all the files that we exported. The getFiles function returns all the files that match a certain pattern, in this case /star, which means any name, and the extension 3ds. Let's assign the result to a variable called the files. The result is an array containing all the file names that match this pattern. We can do print the files, and the result is equivalent to the content of the Windows Explorer, the boxes from 1 to 7 and the sphere 0, 1. Now we can use the import file function in a for loop for f in the files. The variable f is going to be assigned every single path from this array to import file, the file f, with no prompt, no questions asked, no configuration dialog is going to be displayed during the import. Since in the case of 3ds the default mode is merging into the current scene, this means that we can execute this line and all the single 3ds files, all the 7 boxes and the sphere, are going to be merged into the same scene. This approach of exporting single objects to separate files and also merging them back is very often used when sharing data between applications or exporting animations using the snapshot tool and MaxScript to game assets and so on.